Welcome to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast series, Leading at the Intersection of Business and Law. In this episode, we're pleased to be joined by Bruce Chapple, CEO and Managing Partner at McMillan. We'll hear from Bruce about his recent appointment as CEO and Managing Partner as he discusses his goals for continuing to drive innovation and support the firm in its ongoing growth strategy. We also cover challenges and risks that Bruce is preparing for, and he reveals how he is helping clients adapt and thrive in the current climate of political and economic uncertainty. This episode also explores the future of the legal industry, as Bruce gives his view on how the law firm business model will evolve over the next few years in the era of AI, and how he is preparing at McMillan. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes. A quick note from our podcast sponsor. McMillan LLP is a leading business law firm with a deep understanding of the industries that drive Canada's economy. McMillan knows that practical, responsive advice helps clients achieve their business objectives, both here in Canada and across borders. With offices in each of Canada's major centres, McMillan lawyers bring exceptional industry insights in key sectors, including transportation, technology, infrastructure, construction, natural resources, and energy. Whether navigating a cross-border transaction, structuring a complex private equity deal, securing real estate financing, or resolving high-stakes litigation, international trade challenges, or regulatory disputes, McMillan's industry-focused expertise empowers business leaders to grow and succeed in Canada. Visit www.macmillan.ca for more information.
Welcome to our podcast. I'm Andrew Bowyer, the founder of the Legal Innovation Forum. Today we are interviewing Bruce Chapple, who's the CEO and Managing Partner at McMillan. Bruce has been with McMillan for 28 years in a variety of management roles that have positioned him with a deep knowledge of the firm and its strategy. Most recently, he's stepped into the role of CEO in 2024. An accomplished business lawyer, Bruce's practice focuses on M&A and private equity, and we'd like to thank you for joining us today, Bruce.
Thank you for having me. I look forward to our discussion, and I'm going to start with just a really quick reaction to one of the things you said. It is true that I've been at the firm for 28 years, but the HR department doesn't count the articling year for some reason. So those are sort of like 28 dog years or something. It's actually
okay. 30. Oh, right. Okay. So 30 years. All right. Well, glad we clarified that. So in those 30 years, Bruce, and it could precede the 30 years too, because obviously there was life before becoming a lawyer. Tell us a little bit about your life and your career path and how that's evolved over these decades.
Delighted to, Andrew. And I'll just touch briefly on life before law, because I think all experiences are relevant for a lawyer, for a business, for a leader. And so I do find that things that were part of my life before law are actually relevant, perhaps now more so than ever in my career. I grew up in Toronto, spent a lot of time here, did my undergrad down in University of Pennsylvania, the Wharton School of Business. And I went down there for a specific reason. The free trade agreement had come into place right around the time I was looking at universities. And I wanted very much to have a better understanding of the American business culture, which was going to very quickly become the North American sort of business culture. And I say free trade agreement deliberately. That was when it was just Canada and the United States. NAFTA wasn't for about 5 or 6 years after that. And so it was very much the talk of the time. It was a great experience. And you and I, when we were getting to know each other a little bit time ago, spoke about skiing. I actually ski raced for the University of Pennsylvania. It was a ski racing club, not a varsity sport, but a lot of fun, raced all around the northeastern United States. Following that, I spent a year in Whistler. That's a big surprise to many lawyers. That was a year where there was no law discussed whatsoever, but great experiences, met people from all around the world, and it was in a beautiful spot. And came back to Toronto after that, went to law school, and then began at the firm. So that's really where your question started. I apologize for the preamble, but
no, absolutely, yeah. And then at the firm itself, tell us about your practice and how that's evolved.
Absolutely. I began at the firm, if you do the math now, as an articling student in 1995. I came back into what we call our business law group, which is a group focused primarily on private businesses, sort of outside general counsel advice. It's M&A, it's private M&A. That grew into private equity quite quickly. And so I watched the firm evolve over the years from 1995 to present. we were Toronto only back then. The firm's view was very much that you could service the Canadian market from just Toronto. That's one of the evolutions I've seen over the last 30 years, is that the world is more complicated across geographies, be they provinces, countries, continents. And so there's a lot more interaction needed. And so it was very much a client-driven decision, a client-driven dynamic at the firm when we deliberately expanded out first to Montreal, then Calgary, and then nationally picking up Vancouver and Ottawa as well, with a series of mergers that took place from about, I'm going to get the dates wrong, but 02 to 2010, something like that. Do you want me to talk a bit about some of the roles I had over those years?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So again, I was practicing law at the beginning, associate, moved through to partner and so forth, but had some interesting roles along the way, including early on supporting our United Way campaign, which is an interesting dynamic in Toronto. It's so prevalent across the big businesses here that it's almost a part of being in the Toronto business community that you as a business organization participate in something like that. So got to meet some great people externally, and then as well work with people internally on morale, on team building, on getting together, not necessarily raising money, but of course that was part of it. And then evolved into other positions like I was chief firm partner, which is a made up title. Many firms don't have that, but it was a role designed where I was to think about integration between the different firms that were that had merged over the years, and making sure that we worked across our offices in a effective way. We believed then, and we still do now, that working collaboratively and using teams across the offices makes us more powerful. We use the phrase for about 15 years now, one office, and we very much feel that we deliver on that. We're more effective because we can work across those offices. And my job was to promote that dynamic from the early days. And on another occasion, I had a role as chief finance partner, which was essentially collaborating with our CFO and helping deliver messages and bring feedback from the partnership to the finance side of our business. And it's an important role. We could talk about the operations side of the business, but that's gotten more and more professional over those 30 years. And I think that's a good thing for law firms. I was a member of our professional services committee, which does associate reviews. I was a member of our allocation committee, which does partner compensation. I've chaired that. So I've had a variety of roles over the years and got to see a lot of different people across the firm. And it's ultimately, I'm going to say this a few times today, it's a people business. And so of those various roles, the chief firm partner was one of the most interesting. I sat in pretty much all of our colleagues' offices from Vancouver to Montreal, and got to hear what they were thinking about and ways in which they interacted differently with the firm, and in ways which we could make them better and therefore the firm better. So it was a really interesting role.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a fascinating business context in Canada, and insofar that it's such a large geographical country. And I grew up out west, as I said to you earlier, and you notice quite different between the regions, the cities, and certainly the business context in these different regions and cities are unique. Are there any things that you've sort of, on that sort of cross Canada, we'll call it Bruce's cross Canada adventure, over the years, that you've noticed, or you could distill about what Canadian business is and what makes it unique, and what your firm's role in sort of supporting that story has been?
Yes, so absolutely, and to echo and maybe amplify your comment about the regions being different, one of the places where I learned that lesson best was riding the chairlift in Whistler during that year I spent out there. I would inevitably talk to people about where I was from, Toronto, and I would get different reactions based on which part of the country the other folks on the chairlift were on, and it really hammered home to me, the way that we think about the country, as you say, different, but also the same. And so on my so-called Bruce's cross-country adventure, there's absolutely as much or more that is similar across the country as there is different. We tend to focus on the difference, but we are generally a people that want to be fair. We are generally people that are ambitious, but perhaps more humble about that ambition. We are a people that want to do things professionally, do it right, do it in a legally compliant way. I'll bring the law back into this. And want to thrive as an organization, but also proud of the differences across the country. We'll get into this a little bit, the current dynamic and what the future looks like. But in this tumultuous time with the new U.S. president, I think Canadians doubling down, or perhaps rediscovering all the stuff that makes us more similar than different. And so I hope we can use that as a point of pride going forward. I hope things get less tumultuous, but we can also use this as an inflection point in time for pride and ambition about being Canadian.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting set of points there too, and I think you're right. It is. I like that definition or distinction that it is perhaps an inflection point about what being Canadian means. And I've lived in the U.S. myself for a number of years in New York and abroad in the U.K. So I do understand that, having come back a number of years ago, what that's about, and it's a fascinating context to do business in this country, and also abroad too, and with our trade partners. Bruce, two other questions on you on Bruce's adventure. In terms of your practice, you focused on finance, broadly writ large. What prompted that focus? Like what drew you into that, and what did what can you observe about how that the capital markets have changed in Canada, in maybe in Toronto specifically over the years? And then the second question, because obviously you have a key leadership role as CEO of the firm now, but throughout your career you've embraced leadership roles, and what drove you to do that beyond just your practice?
Sure. So happy to hit both those things. What drove me to this, we'll call it finance, broadly speaking. Of course, I highlighted already that I was at University of Pennsylvania at Wharton. I was there studying business. So business was an interest of mine from the get-go. And I of course, there's many different things that can happen within a law firm. And in fact, we're doing a 1L recruit today. I was up talking to a bunch of the young students who were here, trying to get jobs at the firm and then interviewing elsewhere. And it's a really exciting time. But the point I make to them, and I would make now, is that there are a lot of different characteristics of different practices within law firms. There are a lot of different personalities for the people who choose to do those different practices. It's very interesting. And so when you think about the business side of it, which is what I was interested in, I think of it as lawyers more as problem solvers than as lawyers. There's a problem. It's a business problem. It may be just getting the agreement done, or maybe how to complete the negotiations, or maybe there's some legal issue at a plant or whatever it is. We're here to help make that business more effective. Ultimately, we're service providers, so we have to be comfortable with that role, but we are effectively helping business. And so that was the part of the job that excited me more so than dispute resolution or compliance with technical legal things. And those things are all very important. In fact, if you're a tax practitioner, you can save a ton of money for your clients. So there's lots of ways to help clients, but I liked the business problem solving aspect of it, and that's what drew me into that area. Your sort of follow-on question on that was, how have markets changed? I think you're thinking of capital markets in particular over the years. And there was a theory, when I was harkening back to my Wharton days, there was a theory that the competitive advantage of the future was access to capital. And that's probably continues to be correct. And so efficiency of capital markets is incredibly important. They're probably more international now than they ever were, more of an emphasis on concentrated exchanges. As well, the growth of private capital during that time has been a new phenomena, so that traditional companies who would think only of going to an IPO to get to the next sort of level of liquidity or so-called exit, so that they can move on to the next stage of life as a business, are now looking at being acquired by various funds that have raised private capital in various ways, and that private capital is more sophisticated than it ever has been. So I think, and I'll tie in one more theme that you started with at the beginning there. What about Canada? The efficiency of our markets for the future is important for our competitiveness.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So, Bruce, moving on to the sort of broader drivers and trends at play in the legal ecosystem and how it relates, one of our key ways we look at things at the forum, we call it the intersection of business and law and the business of law. That's our tagline. And if we're looking at those sort of key drivers and trends, there's a few I want to touch on. The first is you've touched on it already a few times, is people. And if you have, newly trained lawyers joining the firm, or as articling students or associates, etc. I mean, it is an interesting era. We see a significant generational shift underway in all ecosystems. So we have multiple generations under the same roof. it was quite an interesting phenomenon. We have on top of that the outcomes of the pandemic, where we have all kinds of different ways of working and interacting and collaborating and working with clients, et cetera, and working internally. And third, and we'll touch on it a bit more too, but we have this sort of, I guess, large capture of the public's imagination as it pertains to AI. AI has been around actually since the 1950s, but when ChatGPT got on the radar and its disruptive potential across sectorally, including the legal one, that has really created a new kind of opportunity and also area of perhaps concern. And I was wondering how you sort of see all three of those playing out in the current moment.
Okay, so we're doing the light questions today, eh?
Just softballs.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, so I said it already, and I believe it strongly. We are a people business, and we will always be a people business.
Mm-hmm.
That is important. That is part of our strategic plan, that we should be a great place to work. And being a great place to work isn't just to feel good. It is so that we have quality people here. It's so that we have people that become the best at what they do, so that they have great careers. Many will choose not to finish their careers with us, but we are known among law firms, and we pride ourselves, and we spend a lot of focus on our training. So we are developing people from the beginning. I just told you about being at the recruiting session this morning. I attended that because it's important that we get good quality candidates. Once we get them in, we need to train them well. Once they're here, we need to, once they're training, we need to do it in various ways. We need to do formal training. We need to do informal training. We have mentoring programs. We have actual segments on the business of law, the way you described it, so that our young lawyers are not just learning how to be good technicians, but also to think about how the firm can continue to thrive. And so it's incredibly important. On your question about the multi-generations, it's interesting. We had, one of the things we do is we make available for in-house counsel professional developments, couple professional development segments. We did one of those in the fall, which was exactly the topic you said, multi-generations in the workplace. And so that is important for older people like me to understand, as well as the young, so that we can communicate better. There are different styles, and the styles can lead to misinterpretation or bad communication when none is intended. And so being able to bridge that gap is important. And so that's a small part of the training, a small part of the thinking that we're doing. But we are mindful of the multi generations in the workforce, and how to capitalize on that and be better. One of my priorities as CEO is improved collaboration. I touched on that a little bit earlier when I talked about the chief firm partner and getting the offices working together better, but also people within offices. We are more powerful if we can collaborate. We're more powerful if we can draw on each other's ideas, draw on each other's backgrounds. That doesn't mean spinning tires with 5 people sitting in a room. It means just drawing on the right people at the right time in order to give better advice. And so, again, that is a real priority for us. The related question you asked, which is sort of a generational one, or at least I'll interpret it that way, was about COVID. And so COVID was a kind of weird point in time for everybody, not just law firms, where there was very little personal interaction. So I just described to you the importance of people, the importance of personal relationships. Those were diminished during COVID when you could only interact by video. Of course, video is better than a phone call, which is better than an email, which is better than a text, but it's second best to being in person.
Absolutely, yeah.
and I want to emphasize this because I know that this often gets characterized as FaceTime. I don't believe people need FaceTime. I do believe they need good interaction with each other and natural interaction, where you have a chance to interact in a way that draws on things that aren't necessarily part of the agenda. It's the discussion about a business opportunity when you're at the coffee station. It is inadvertently hearing that a meeting is happening later and being able to drop in when you weren't otherwise invited. It's the impromptu call, which may not be anything about delivering legal service, but might help someone learn how to deal with a situation. And so they sit in on the call rather than having to dial in on a video screen and be more prominent. And so that's part of training. And so interestingly, that intergenerational speaker that I mentioned to you, and then I had a second one recently, both said that the generation that came of age professionally during COVID are several years behind in their development. And they believe they're several years behind in their development because of that lack of that interaction that I just described to you. That's not to say that can't be done in a hybrid environment or can't be done with deliberate attention to it. But there is a little bit of a loss that we didn't initially make up for during those COVID years. And so that's something we're focused on as well. And it's a priority of mine that people spend as much time together, be it at cocktails, at informal get-togethers, at client events, etc. The last one you touched on, the three here you gave me, was AI, and I think you described it both as perhaps a threat and an opportunity. I choose the opportunity side of it, and so I of course you have to be mindful of the threat side of it as well, but it's a really exciting time, and people sort of, maybe we used the word inflection point earlier for a different context, maybe think of it that way. I actually think of it more as just a really steep part of the curve of change. When I started in the business, it took a team of associates several days to put together a first draft of an agreement. And then it was completed late at night. So someone had to fax it. It's an hour on the fax machine. It's a 100-page fax. One page gets missed. You got to reload it again. It's another hour. This generation will never know that frustration of the in the middle. Yeah. 9 pages confirmed out of 100. Which one did you miss? You got to send the whole. So that is backwards, and we can laugh about it now.
Yeah,
that was hours and hours work. That was not quality work. No one wants to fax at midnight because the fax team all went home at 8 o'clock. And now we can do it with a database, a good precedent, and someone knowledgeable in the area. They can put together that same agreement in several hours. So we as an industry are delivering way more value in a way shorter time than we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so what will AI do? Of course, it'll take us further up and up a steeper part of that curve. It can be done in seconds instead of hours, but it's the same curve. And ultimately, I really believe in our business. I described to you why I was interested in it earlier. We're a problem-solving business. We're a people business. Yeah. That people part's not going anywhere. The AI can't take me away. It can take away the hours of sitting in front of a computer, but that's not the part I liked. So
absolutely,
we're going to keep the part of the business that's good. It's giving advice to senior people. It's winning relationships. And it's that interpersonal reaction that's important. And that interpersonal action, I like to say to when I'm encouraging people to build those relationships and to come to the office to meet with people, is part of your job that can't be taken away by AI. On the opportunity side, just to build on that a little bit, the AI, on the other hand, will give us more information more quickly. So if there is 2 or 3 issues in a 100-page agreement that we want to talk about, we can now have more access to more examples. We can have more access to when those things were used. Armed with that extra information, we can have a deeper and better conversation about that agreement. And so we can take this data and actually give better advice in a shorter period of time. And so that's the opportunity side of it. And the threat side of it, it's obvious. There's less work, less hours, but like I said, those aren't the quality part of the job. And so I'm excited about being ready to use the technology properly. And we can talk about it. I think it's one of your later questions about how we're being ready. But we got to be ready for it. And if we're ready for it, we can use it in a meaningful way that actually makes us better as an industry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting, right? Because this notion of value and I think, our big theme, and I think it's going to run out for quite a few years now, is that we live in a risk-on era. You have multiple risks that are unexpectedly and expectedly, in some cases, coming out of the woodwork. And if you're responsible for running an organization, advising an organization on mitigating risk and seeing opportunities in that risk, I think the profession as a whole is well placed. I mean, in the context of advising, companies and helping that, I think it's extremely important. And then you obviously have, AI could be, like I said, it's one of those risks and opportunities, but that sort of distillation of value is very, very important that lawyers can impart and guide companies. I always say lawyers are quite omniscient. You get to see all kinds of situations across sectors. If you're an in-house lawyer, if you're a general counsel, you get to see all across the organization, which is a very unique position. And especially when you live in this sort of very complex, multifaceted, fast-changing environment, being able to distill that is extremely valuable. In fact, I would argue it's in some cases existential risk for companies who don't see things coming. And so I don't know if you have anything you want to expand on that concept and how you're thinking about that, and perhaps in terms of your own story too, right? Probably the kind of advice you're giving now, or the way you're advising and adding value to clients, of course, experience, but much different than maybe you expected when you started in your career, in terms of the evolution of that value add to your clients, both internally and your stakeholders, sort of clients externally and your stakeholders internally.
Yeah, so happy to comment on all those things. In listening to GC panels, and it sounds like you're in touch with a number of GCs. That existential risk is one of the things they identify. You describe them as omnipresent within their organization, often very big organizations. But the beautiful advantage that we have is seeing many industries and many businesses within an industry in many cases. And so, what's the risk around the corner that a particular organization isn't seeing is what they're looking to get from us. And maybe we will have experienced it, maybe we won't. We're doing a lot of work right now, especially in this time, this political environment, and with the threats of tariffs from the US, et cetera, of putting our ear to the ground and trying to make sure that we are hearing what is happening, with regulators, within markets, within industries. What are people talking about? What are they expecting? And similar to us, I described some opportunities. Businesses are seeing opportunities in some cases, threats in many cases. That threats are easier to identify than the opportunities sometimes.
Sure. Yeah.
The GCs don't often call us and say, what's the really big opportunity around the corner that we haven't thought of. They do ask us, what's the risk around the corner we haven't thought of. And so it is fun to be able to talk to different businesses and get that perspective. And so again, that's part of the business side that interested me. The other part of your question was, how has our advice changed over the years? And what I would say is that when I started, we were an old-fashioned law firm. Like many, we weren't out of step with our time. We were in the Royal Bank Plaza, a beautiful building. The Gold Building was built in the late 60s. Had been there, maybe early 70s. We've been there since the early 70s, 30 years. It had the great big oak doors. I had a massive desk. I had a credenza and a sitting area. And I moved over to these offices 20 years ago, and it's way smaller but way more efficient because my laptop was sort of perched on the side of that big old desk I just told you about, and so we have gotten more advanced. But at that time, there was a very sort of hierarchical view. And again, I think we were ahead of the street of moving away from this, but the senior lawyer took the call, someone else did the work, perhaps someone junior to that did the first go at it. And the absolute goal at the time was perfection, the very best that could be done. And we still pride ourselves on doing the absolute top quality work. But it's no longer a question of perfection at all costs in every case. Where is the value of the work? What is the risk associated with going with path A instead of path B? If path A is cheaper, we might choose to do that. And so it's more of a risk analysis, a value add analysis than a pure legal perfection analysis. You got to know the legal perfection in order to answer that question properly. And so we pride ourselves on our quality, but we also pride ourselves on being responsive to what clients need in a particular circumstance. And I think that's an evolution of the industry over time.
Yeah, excellent. It's a great answer on multiple levels and interesting things. But I'm curious in terms of just sort of expanding upon this idea of the notion of value, and obviously what it says on the tin of our forum, the Innovation Forum. I've always looked at it as it's not just about technology. Innovation is about doing things differently, thinking about things differently, mindsets. Technology is a supporting, evolving factor. And I think you made an interesting point just a bit earlier about AI, which I agree with. In 5 years, people will just be like, it's just technology, right? We've always been adapting technology throughout human history, right? And so this is just something that's come along the way. Now, we'll see, the hype and the reality and everything else with AI. There's plenty to play out here. And the disruption that the outcomes of the disruption from that, I think, will be interesting and dynamic, and probably not what people are expecting them to be at this juncture. Again, the same thing with all technology. We can think about the advent of the internet. We thought things would be so much different, and they're different than we expected. But that being said, leading a firm through this era of disruption and change, through this risk-on era, it needs innovative approaches and mindsets and structures and technology. So tell us about that sort of strategy with innovation in mind that you're focused on sort of developing and iterating upon and executing upon at the firm, and how that sort of fits into the bigger context of that value creation for clients.
Yeah, so absolutely. Some of the innovation I've touched on already. So I'll put what we're doing now in context. I talked about the old oak doors, et cetera. I talked about being a national firm and collaboration. And so, part of the mindset change, part of the innovation for us when we adopted that one office mantra, when we started saying we were going to be collaborate across offices, we thought we could be better than other Canadian law firms at working across the geographies. And that challenge is a bit more pronounced because some of the regional differences we talked about earlier. But again, we feel like we've done that because of the personality of our firm, and we've been able to emphasize it over a number of years. And so that was a sort of organizational change that was important that we bring forward now, that continues to give us an advantage. Now, when I talk about having a sort of workshop across the office, it's all our offices, all, different markets, and so getting more ideas in more quickly. So that's sort of the backdrop for what we're doing now. We want to have our ear to the ground. I mentioned that already. So, for example, on U.S. trade, we've had a group get together and discuss what different things are happening in different markets and with different facts, different industries, again, with a view to being ready for those kind of things. And we've done this in the past. We've seen it. We were one of the first movers in cannabis. We did a lot of work in the public market space for that, and we grew a very robust practice very quickly from something that hadn't existed at all before. That has of course diminished over time. That was a big push for a couple of years, but that was important. We have a construction law group that again, where people they thought more about practice areas than they did about industry groups. We have focused for years on industry groups, and one of the more interesting ones that we developed was our construction law group, where again, none existed before, but we have leaders within the firm who said, this is interesting, this is a practice area, this is an industry we need to be part of, and so let's get together. And so as a result, they have really focused their expertise, really focused a dedicated team, and really come well known, probably one of the best known at any firm across the country with that expertise in that industry. And so again, that's part of the innovation. Trade law group, again, one of the strongest. It's based in Ottawa, and so it's incredibly active right now. You'll see several of my colleagues on social media all over the place, on traditional news all over the place, and so that's again a group where we a year ago sat around and said, okay, with this uncertainty in the U.S., this is one area where we know there's going to be action, and so let's make sure we have the resources in that group. Let's make sure they're supported. Let's promote them, and it's played out exactly as we expected. So those are sort of the organizational design parts of what you were asking about, and AI weaves into it. And of course, that's maybe a more pure technology question at the moment. But of course, we have, like many, run pilots using various different of the generative AI platforms, and got to see how our admin team react to them, how our lawyer team react to them, who uses them, who doesn't, what are the better use cases, what are the better ways to use them with the better use cases. So that experience and learning is incredibly important as we continue to think about it. And so we have an innovation working group that gets together regularly. They mostly talk about generative AI right now, but they get together very regularly, talk about the opportunity there. On that topic, our goal is to be an extremely quick follower, essentially. At our size in our market, we don't think that we can be the one developing new technology, but we can be ready to use it in a really good way. And you mentioned the internet. I think there's a good analogy there. If you, I'm not sure if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's latest book, Revenge of the Tipping Point, but he talks about, I think it's Walgreens, and how they were quiet on the sidelines as the internet came to play, and how some internet startups in the pharmacy space grew to massive valuations in a very quick period while they quietly said nothing. And then they figured out how to do it and how to use their on-the-ground store footprint across the US to be ready with an internet delivery system that eventually kicked the butts of those internet startups. And so they were a quick follower who figured out how to do it properly. So that's kind of the position I want to be in. Like we're testing it, we're ready, we're gonna have people ready to do it. We're gonna know which technology is gonna try to figure out which one's gonna win, be ready to use it, and we're experimenting with now. The other thing I've got to say, just because this might get played, or we're hoping to be played broadly, I guess, but a lot of our clients are very cautious about the use of generative AI. A lot of the outside counsel guidelines actually prohibit it without consent, and the concern is, of course, privacy, confidentiality, information getting out, and so we're exceedingly careful to make sure we are complying with those guidelines and not divulging any information. So we're approaching this in a way that we're ready for the technology, but also mindful of not creating any risk for clients.
Yeah, it's interesting too. I mean, on the in-house side, right? We were running a conference in Atlanta in the fall, and someone who's senior in-house person said on one of the discussions, a large private company out of Atlanta said, the business wants us to embrace AI, and I can't even download Adobe through our firewall, right? So like we've set up all these guardrails, and then the business is saying, and this is 6 months ago now almost. So it was sort of like, that sort of, I think there was a YouTube video saying, CEO in 2023 saying AI, and everybody's clapping, right? That's our strategy. But you do have to balance that opportunity and risk, and that for lawyers, really balancing that opportunity and risk is a key. It's a real key fundamental point to think of, both when they're consuming legal services and then they're advising their internal clients at these organizations on how they should be employing AI, what to be looking out for. And I think the fast follower idea is smart too, because it's such a nascent, and there is so much of a hype cycle around it. And you just see how fragile it is when you see the DeepSeek announcement a couple of weeks ago out of China, and how the markets react in a very I don't know, responsive way, shall we put it? And then it kind of goes back to the norm, right? And it's so fascinating. I mean, you've worked in capital markets for a long time, right? So there's all kinds of dynamics at play, all kinds of stories being told, and people telling stories to themselves. But it shows its fragility, and also I think there's inherent risks, and there's inherent risks on betting too much on the wrong horse at the outset, which could have long-term consequences. So that Walgreens analogy is an interesting one. I think, there's also people who put out, articles or op-eds about the legal sector talking about, Blockbuster versus Netflix didn't see it coming. So that's a counterpoint to that too, of seeing, how this is going to play out. In terms of, mindsets within the organizations, that business forward way of thinking, you raised an interesting point a little while back about business training for young lawyers and lawyers in the firm too, right? Because that's not something that law schools typically have done. Although I know there are some that are thinking about and doing courses and programs, et cetera. It doesn't go unnoticed. But that mindset, that flexible mindset, that your career is going to look different. You're going to be working on a lot of different challenges. It's not such a sort of structured expectation as you move up through the ranks or the hierarchy. Any thoughts on that?
We want, I said it before, we want our associates, when they come in, we've chosen smart people. We want them to have great training. We want them to be a success no matter where they go. And how a business works is important to understand, whether they're working with us or whether they go elsewhere, or whether they're just retaining law firms in the future. And so we feel that that training is important. I think part of your question may be, how do we make them ready for what we don't know what is around the corner?
Yeah.
And really, a lawyer's job, I'll go back to my analogy from earlier, is a problem-solving job. Even I sort of distinguish it from litigation and other sort of technical compliance, but even those things are problem-solving jobs. And so, what is the objective? What does the client want? In some cases, we fight litigation when we know we're going to lose, because they want it for strategic advantage, right? So we are advisors. We are helping with a business problem, not necessarily getting the exact legal result every time. It's often part of a strategy. And so learning to understand, to be responsive to our clients is important, again, whether they work for us or work for someone else. And I think if you learn the technical law, okay, yes, that's sort of table stakes, but then learn what drives a client, what drives a business, and a law firm is a business in this scenario.
Mm-hmm.
If you learn those things, you can be a better advisor, you can be a better manager, you can be a better leader, you can be just a better team player. And so I don't know exactly what's around the corner, but critical thinking, learning to use the resources, learning to use the tools around you, and learning to focus on the objective so that you're responsive to again, we pride ourselves as a firm of being responsive to our clients. It's big team, small team, fight the litigation when you know you're going to lose, fight it when you think you're going to win, of course. But what is the client objective is the end result. And so that's what we're trying to teach our associates, and whether the tools are a fax machine, or there was even a telex when I started, or email, or whatever the next faster transmission is, they're tools. And so learning the critical thinking, the objective, is the important part of it. And so I think we can teach that.
Yeah, fascinating response and time to. I want to move on to our sort of final theme, and you may not want to look too far in the future, so I'll give you a low runway. 2 to 5 years, like, how do you see the structural dynamics of the sector changing? Now, I think one thing that's interesting too that we haven't talked too much about is what clients want. How are they articulating that, expressing that to you? How are you listening to that and sort of integrating it into your offering to them? And do you notice any sort of fundamental top changes that are going on there? And then obviously you have this context of technology, which we've touched on, the potential disruption of AI. You obviously have new competitors. We also have, I think we have a fairly large structural change going on in the world economy right now, which is a sort of once in 35 years event, this reordering. So you have all these dynamics at play. And if you could succinctly define a little bit about what that maybe looks like for a law firm, for the ecosystem and McMillan specifically in the next 2 to 5 years, do you see any, what areas do you see fundamentally changing, and which do you see potentially just staying the same?
So a succinct answer to what's going to happen in the entire industry, that's a little tough, but let's tackle it. In that sort of 2 to 5 year range, I see the use of technology growing. Lawyers are often criticized for not adopting technology fast enough, but I would point out that certainly over the last decade, the growth in our costs of anything, any part of our business, technology is growing the fastest. It's growing exponentially, and it's not just generative AI. It's the docket system. It's the billing, e-billing systems with our clients. It's the internal expense reports that go through a specialized thing. It's the technology is rampant and makes all of our functions more efficient. So continued and rapid adoption of technology will be a theme of the next 2 to 5 years. What do clients want? That's a really interesting question. I think what has happened is that clients' wants and wishes have become more varied. Especially in big organizations, there's often very large legal departments who are very sophisticated, and so they come to us for very specialized, either very specialized knowledge, or when they need bench strength, or when they want some regional input, or to the earlier point, to get our vantage seeing other businesses so that we can bring in a broader perspective to help them understand risk better. And on the other end, you see cuts to legal departments, so they no longer have the staff they want, and so sometimes they need to outsource more when there's bumps in the activity level. And so again, I would say one of the themes of what we're proud of how we approach things is we are responsive to what the clients want. If it's a big team, get it done quick. We've got that capability. If it's a lean team, be cost effective and talk to us about lower cost but perhaps higher risk paths. We're happy to do that. So being ready for a wider variety of what clients want. Some want us to adopt AI very quickly. Others want to be very cautious. It's more conservative, more risk averse, and so we have to be ready for a greater variety of things. Be ready with technological solutions where it's appropriate. Due diligence is a lot with it. E-discovery is a lot that way. We do a lot in that area. That's very technology intensive now, and so being ready for a bigger variety of things is important. For that purpose, for our firm, we want to be slightly bigger. So I have a growth ambition. That's one of my 3 priorities: is collaborate more, growth, and revise our strategic plan are sort of my personal 3 priorities. The growth, we feel like we've had nice growth last year. We're on a roll. We grew about 10%. We made some great partner hires last year. But I think if we were a little bit bigger, it would help with the bumps in activity level where clients want it, the bumps in specialization, and also just adopting some of these technologies. If you're going to invest in some expensive technology, it's more efficient to pay for that over more people. And so we're looking for a little efficiency, a little more market presence, a little more ears to the ground. And so what does it look like? A little bit bigger would be better. More use of technology. Within the industry, you see some of these alternative legal service providers, and that's kind of interesting. That's a growing trend. And they're doing special types of work that they can do more efficiently. But you also see some of that kind of service delivery being adopted within law firms. And so I think that's also really interesting. Law firms are smart people in their businesses too. So we have within our shop, we have a lobbying and crisis communication firm called McMillan Vantage. We're the only one in Canada that have that. It's quite common in the US, but these aren't just a few lawyers doing this. It's an actual business dedicated to that. 30 professionals and ready with lobbying and government relations where it's needed, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really interesting business line, and I think, drawing to a conclusion, I think it's interesting too that, your focus is on this is a growth opportunity. That's a core part of our strategy. And you would think logically, right? We're adopting more technology, so we'll need fewer people, which is kind of the antithesis of what you're saying there. That's an interesting approach, and I think also says, we're long law firms growing in this market and continuing to add value to our clients. So
It's not to dismiss your technology concern. It's I believe more people who can use the technology well. We're going to get better at what we do. Is my vision, Andrew.
Absolutely, yeah, and you're right to say too. I mean, this is something that's come up in many discussions that we've had. Is folks think, okay, well, if you adopt a big AI tool, I won't name names. It's expensive, and so clients, we can do it this way, so we can focus on the high value. But to run this platform is very expensive in multiple different ways. So I think those assumptions kind of get put to the test. And I think going back to your Malcolm Gladwell comment, which I think is a great one, is that having that incumbent advantage in these situations is also very valuable. But being aware of what's changing around you and open to it and flexible, I think is a real competitive advantage too when as things sort of play out in ways that we may or may not expect them to. So, Bruce, any other parting comments on this very interesting interview?
How long it'll be till this is distributed? But for tonight, it's Go Canada in the hockey game.
All right. We'll all be watching. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Bruce, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to interview you today. Lots of really interesting insights, and I know you're very busy, so appreciate you spending some time with us. And we look forward to having you back again sometime for a check-in on how things are moving along at McMillan. So thank you again.
Thank you. I really enjoyed the chat. Thanks.
Thank you for tuning in to the Legal Innovation Forum podcast. Stay tuned on our website for the next edition. You can listen to us on all your favorite podcast platforms. Tune in on liforum.co/podcasts.